Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, it's January again. It's the beginning of a new year. It's a month ostensibly named for Janus, the Roman god of transitions and beginnings. Janus is often pictured as having two faces, one looking to the past and the other to the future, which serves as a reminder that we exist only in the present, on the cusp between what was and what will be. And because it's January, a time for resolutions, renewed hope, and fresh starts, after considering and rejecting several topics, I decided I needed to try to do something a little more uplifting. So I decided to borrow a few ideas from some of my previous talks and sprinkle in some new perspective and rearrange it all into something new. It'll be new to most of you. And if some of you do recognize parts of it, well, that's why I entitled it, "Oh, You're Still Here?" So, if you do recognize it, pretend you don't. But. So, in my attempt to be uplifting, I'll start with this. We're all gonna die. Not for a good long time, I hope. But the evidence is pretty clear on this one. It's in the very nature of life that it's temporary, and there's not much to be gained by denying that, so I thought I'd get that out of the way and hopefully move on to something a little more uplifting. In one of my earlier talks, I included a hypothetical conversation with God, or Goddess, or Cosmic Consciousness, or Yoda if you prefer. It's just a literary device that went something like this. Just before I pop out into the world, God takes me aside and says, and I don't know if I can do a God voice very well, but I am going to offer you a great gift, the gift of life. If you accept this gift, you'll be given a physical form with which to experience and interact with the universe for a time. If you refuse, you'll simply never exist. I can't tell you how long the gift will last. Probably not more than 100 years, possibly much less. During that time, you will experience great joy and crushing disappointment, happiness and sadness, success and failure, love and loss. The positives will probably outweigh the negatives, but I won't guarantee it. You will have some control over the course of your life, but you will also be at the mercy of many things beyond your control. What is the purpose of this life, I ask? Why, the purpose of life is to live, of course. But what does it mean? Nothing yet. It will be up to you to impart meaning to your life. What happens at the end of this life? Will I still exist? Will I come back here, wherever the heck this is? Sorry, that has to remain my secret. But a bit of advice, you have no control over it, so try not to worry about it too much while you're out there. Oh great, do you have any other helpful hints? Just one. Everyone you encounter out there will be trying to figure life out as they go, just like you will. It's a difficult journey, but it will be easier if you help each other through it. That's all I can tell you. Now it's time to decide. Will you accept my offer? As opposed to not existing at all, I guess I'll take my chances. Bring it on. That's the spirit. Off you go then. Bon voyage. And the rest, as they say, is history. Not that we actually had any say in the matter, but how many of you, if you had been given that choice, would have chosen to come into this world even if you'd known up front that it wouldn't be forever? I'm going to share a little Buddhist parable that you may be familiar with. I remember Rabbi Rami relating a version of it in a recent talk that many of you were probably here for. A man traveling across a field encounters a tiger. He flees the tiger after him. Coming to a cliff, he catches hold of the root of a wild vine and swings himself down over the edge. The tiger sniffs at him from above. Trembling, he looks down to where, far below, another tiger is waiting to eat him. Only the vine sustains him. Then 2 mice, one white and one black, came from the bushes and little by little started to gnaw away at the vine. The man looked and saw a luscious strawberry near him. Grasping the vine with one hand, he plucks the strawberry with the other. How sweet it tasted. We all live clinging to that vine, precariously perched between birth and death. But if we go through life only worrying about whether that vine's going to break, we're going to miss out on a lot of strawberries. And with a little change in our perspective, knowing that there aren't going to be an infinite number of strawberries makes them even sweeter and makes us appreciate them even more. There's a poem that you're probably familiar with called Desiderata, written by Max Ehrmann in 1927, made popular by Les Crane's recording in 1971, that includes these lines. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here, and whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. And because every point needs a counterpoint, there's also a slightly lesser known parody of Desiderata called Deteriorata, written by Tony Hendra for the National Lampoon in 1972, that includes these lines. You are a fluke of the universe. You have no right to be here. And whether you can hear it or not, the universe is laughing behind your back. Are we children of the universe or flukes of the universe? There's no way to know, and maybe it's just two different ways of looking at the same thing. It doesn't really matter, because either way, we're here. Children or flukes or both, we're part of the universe, and we have the opportunity to try to make sense of it all. The most fundamental metaphysical truth to me, a la Descartes, is simply that I exist. Now, by itself, that's not saying much. This rock, for example, exists. It existed long before I did, although it may have been part of a bigger rock. And it will continue to exist long after I'm gone. But the major difference between me and this rock is that I know I exist. This rock doesn't even appreciate that it alone, among all rocks, has been specially selected to play a starring role in my talk today. Actually, I pretty much picked up the first rock I found, but don't tell the rock, it'll hurt its feelings. Which brings me to the one shining truth that is so universally recognized that it's declared on shopping mall directory maps around the world. You are here. I hope you share my fascination with the simple fact that each of us gets to not only experience the universe, but to play a part in it. The universe is different for you having been in it. To borrow a metaphor from writer Orson Scott Card, if the history of the universe were a tapestry, each of our lives would be a thread in that tapestry. Regardless of whether there is anyone with a view of the whole tapestry, whether there's a weaver actively at work, whether somebody set up the loom and then left, or whether the tapestry is simply creating itself, it doesn't really matter. We're still each a part of it. I have suffered from, and I'm prone to, clinical depression. Stopping to remind myself what a gift it is simply to be part of the universe. The awe-inspiring wonder of that simple realization helps me deal with that. When I assert that I exist, I'm not talking about my physical self, about the collection of stuff that makes up my body. I'm talking about my mind, my consciousness, that thing that is aware that it exists. Sorry, Rock. Consciousness, especially human consciousness, is not an easy thing to define. I'll quote Julian Jaynes from his succinctly titled book, The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. Say that 5 times fast. If understanding a thing is arriving at a familiarizing metaphor for it, then we can see that there will always be a difficulty in understanding consciousness. For it should be immediately apparent that there is not and cannot be anything in our immediate experience that is like immediate experience itself. There is therefore a sense in which we shall never be able to understand consciousness in the same way that we can understand things that we are conscious of. But whatever consciousness is, we all have it, and I'll assert that we know it when we see it. Human consciousness is a special thing. It is fundamentally different from that of other animals, whether it's qualitatively different or just so much greater quantitatively that the difference might as well be qualitative. Our capacity for abstract thought and for such things as considering the long-term consequences of our actions, for example, is fundamentally different from other animals and is probably unique on this planet, at least. I won't deny that other animals think, or even that they are self-aware, but they generally don't sit around pondering their self-awareness. I like to think of the story of the Garden of Eden in the Bible metaphorically, basically as a metaphor for the rise of human consciousness, leaving out the obvious gender bias of the story of Adam and Eve and the apple. But just the idea that humans tasted the fruit of the tree of good and knowledge of good and evil, I take as a metaphor for human consciousness and basically humans becoming aware of the consequences of their actions and thereby, at that point, becoming responsible for the choices we make. The idea that they were then kicked out of the garden and that life was no longer paradise, I sort of take as another way of saying that ignorance was bliss. But the difference between us and other animals is clearly enabled by something in our brain structure. Whether consciousness is made possible by our comically large cerebral cortex, or as James would have it, by the communication between the complementary left and right hemispheres of our brains, or by something else, I'll leave to the neuroscientists. I'll let Casey look into it and do a talk. I'd like to offer some thoughts, though, to make you ponder just how special you are. We are the end result, so far, of millions upon millions of years of evolution on this planet. The product of an ongoing process only made possible at all by a universe in which the laws of physics and chemistry enable life to emerge. In the struggle for survival, our ancestors, at every turn, were the winners. The odds that each of us beat to be here today make winning the Powerball look like an inevitability. I think that we have turned an evolutionary corner, in a sense. Central nervous systems and then brains evolved to facilitate the survival of physical organisms. Brains gave rise to minds, to thought, because that further increased survivability of our bodies. But with the advent of human consciousness, I think we've turned that around. We are more concerned with the survival of mind than of body. Instead of our mind being a mechanism to ensure the survival of our body, we see our body as a vehicle to enable our mind to interact with the world. What was the tail now wags the dog, so to speak. While that may just seem to be a subtle change in perspective, I think it's profoundly significant. Here's a definition of human consciousness for you. We are the universe becoming aware of itself. I looked for the source of that quote, and I couldn't find the original. Instead, I found similar versions attributed to various people, Eckhart Tolle and Carl Sagan among them. It seems to be a common observation. Think about what a cold, dead place the universe would be without life, without its having given rise to an audience that can appreciate its wonder. Along those lines, here's an Annie Dillard quote from our hymnal. It's reading number 420, but if you look it up, I'll be done by the time you get there. We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. And a line that has struck me from stuck with me from George W. Bush's speech at the memorial for the astronauts of the Space Shuttle Columbia. We are that part of creation that seeks to understand all creation. Life, I assert, is a wonderful gift, even if there is no life after death, no world beyond this one. If this is all there is, it's enough. If not, anything else would be a bonus, a new gift. I will admit the possibility of a transcendental reality, that is, a broader framework within which our physical universe exists. But I think that if there were such a thing, it would be utterly beyond our capability to comprehend. It's quite possible that beyond the confines of our universe, concepts such as time or consciousness are meaningless, and thus the questions such as, do we have souls, or is there eternal life after death, don't even make sense. I have become, slowly, gradually, what I call a principled agnostic. In other words, when I say I'm agnostic, I don't mean I don't know whether there's a God or a higher reality or an afterlife because I'm torn on the issue and can't make up my mind, but rather, I don't know whether there's a God or a higher reality or an afterlife because I am not capable of knowing, and neither are you or anyone else in this reality. I speculate about such things because I enjoy it, but I no longer worry about it. Where do we go when we die? I don't know. Where were we before we were born? As Henry David Thoreau put it much more succinctly when asked whether he believed in an afterlife, one world at a time. If there is a transcendental reality, then there's some possibility that we each have a spark of divinity within us, that each of us is part of a higher consciousness. I speculated in an earlier talk, speculation is fun, that if higher reality is, metaphorically or literally, the fourth dimension, that the universe may be a three-dimensional projection or an aspect of that reality, which, if you stretch it far enough, could mean that each of our consciousnesses is just one aspect of a single higher consciousness, and that while we perceive ourselves as separate entities in this universe, we're really all part of a greater whole. If that were true, if we were all part of the same higher consciousness, it's obvious that we all ought to treat each other better. But even if there is no such transcendental reality, if the universe we see and experience is all there is, every other human being on the planet is just as much a miracle as you and I are, and thus deserves to be treated as having inherent worth and dignity. We tend to overlook or discount the utterly amazing fact of our existence simply because it isn't unique. There are 7 billion of us on this planet, and maybe countless more like us out in the universe. But just because a miracle happens billions upon billions of times doesn't mean it's any less amazing or any less wondrous. The next time you see a newborn baby, remind yourself that the miracle has occurred yet again. We think we know the difference between the magical and the mundane, but often the mundane is magical if we just take a moment to appreciate it. A few years ago, I forget whether it was during a talk or in our ensuing talkback circle, one of our members remarked upon how cool it was that he could do this, that he could move his hand at will. That is, that he could will his hand to move and it would happen. And a lot of people kind of snickered at that, but it stuck with me that really is a cool thing. Making a physical object move by the force of your mind, that's telekinesis, folks. Don't think it counts if it's part of your own body? A little while ago, I at least tried to make a bunch of your hands go up without actually touching them. So many of the things we take for granted are actually pretty amazing if you just pay attention. Granted, our bodies don't always work like they're supposed to, or as well as we'd like, and they have an alarming tendency to wear out. But even so, they're pretty amazing. What else would it take to convince you that we're magic? Create life, we do that all the time. That's why there are 7 billion of us. Enough said. And if we didn't have enough magic naturally, technology has brought about a lot more of it. To repeat an oft-cited Arthur C. Clarke quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Just one example. Many of you, probably most, have with you a small device, I hope you remember to mute it, with which you can communicate with people all over the world, all over the planet, by voice, text, or video, conduct business dealings globally in near real time, and access information on much of the accumulated knowledge of human civilization almost instantaneously. Okay, an inordinate fraction of that technology is used to share cute pictures of kittens, but still. A couple of years ago, I saw a birthday card with a cartoon entitled Life Before Google. It showed 2 people sitting on a couch. One says to the other, I just thought of something I'd like to know more about. The other responds, that's a darn shame. Really, the technology we have now, and take for granted a lot of the time, was Star Trek stuff a few years ago. It's awesome stuff. Don't take it for granted just because it's so common. Technological advances in communications and transportation in particular are making the world a lot smaller, and that is ultimately a very good thing. Technology is a double-edged sword. There's always pluses and minuses, to be sure, but more and better communication between people around the world chips away bit by bit at the us versus them worldviews. The more connections are made between people around the world, the more people will realize that what they have in common is more important than what divides them, and the harder it will be to hate each other. It's a slow process, but I believe a relentless and inevitable one. We do have a long, long way to go to achieve peace in the world, but I think we'll get there. To quote Martin Luther King Jr., who, by the way, was paraphrasing the Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. It isn't necessary or possible for any of us to solve all the world's problems on our own, but we do need to endeavor to leave things better than we found them. To that end, if I could offer you one piece of advice, a suggested New Year's resolution perhaps, it would be this. Please do yourself and the world around you a favor and try to minimize the anger in your life. Getting angry often feels good, especially when it's a righteous anger, when we feel justified in our anger. I think sometimes we let anger grow when we don't need to, when we suffer an irritation or annoyance and want to blame it on someone or something. And you know, sometimes it is justifiable. Many times a perceived slight is the result of a misunderstanding, but sometimes somebody really does do us wrong. But even then, anger is not a productive response. It eats us up. It does no good for ourselves or for the world. We often let minor or irrelevant annoyances make us generally irritable, quick to anger, and we end up directing our anger at undeserving targets and adding to their irritation level. So do yourself and the people around you a favor and don't respond to anger with anger. There seems to be a great deal of anger in the air in this country these days. It's almost palpable. Some of it comes from stress, some of it maybe because it's an election year. But I think a lot of our stress comes from a perception that things are worse than they actually are, driven by a 24-hour news cycle, among other things. And I think as the campaign season wears on, we're going to be provoked and even deliberately encouraged to anger. Please don't give in to the temptation. Stay calm and become part of the solution rather than adding to the problem. One of my favorite insights from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh is this. It is my conviction that there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. If you wish to bring about peace in the world, you must bring about peace in yourself. And if you're angry, you're not at peace with yourself. You can even if it seems like it's only semantics, to fight for peace, when you think about it, is a contradiction in terms. You work for peace. Look for constructive solutions. Whatever your mission in life, try to think in terms of working for something rather than against something. Try to build and not destroy. Sometimes it's just a change of perspective, a different way of looking at the same thing, but you'll still make better decisions and sleep better at night. I'm not suggesting that you repress your anger, that you pretend not to be angry while it's eating you up inside. That's not a healthy thing to do. I'm talking about working on not getting angry in the first place, not rising to every provocation, or when you do, letting it pass quickly and not acting out of your rage. We can't avoid getting irritated, at least most of us who aren't Buddhist monks can't. If someone cuts you off in traffic, for example, you're probably not going to smile and wish them a nice day. The trick is to learn to let go of those irritations and not let them fester. It takes a lot of work and a lot of patience with yourself. Meditation is one approach that has helped me a lot, but I'm sure there are other ways to go about it. But please find a way. Life's too short to let anger and stress rob you of the ability to contemplate and appreciate the wonder of our existence. I don't expect that you'll agree with everything I've said or find it all helpful, but as you go through the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs of your daily life, I hope that at least something I've talked about will make you stop for a moment now and then and go, wow. All in all, life is pretty amazing. Please don't lose sight of that. On the other hand, life doesn't come with an instruction manual, and we're all trying to learn as we go and muddle our way through as best we can. So please be patient with each other, help each other through it, and try to leave it better than you found it. Thanks for listening.